You had questions, and now I have the answers for you. Thank you so much for participating and sending me through DMs, sharing comments on my videos across all of my social media platforms, and just reminding me of some of the questions that you had when you first started working with me, so that I could get all of these questions together for my frequently asked questions video. So I have this broken up into 3 parts. I have a part for sellers, I have a part for buyers, and then I have a part that's going to be pretty much for both sides or more neutral questions. And I have set this up to where there's going to be chapters for each individual question. So that way you can look in the description box, find the question that you need answered, and navigate a little bit faster than just trying to watch the whole video. Let me know if you like that in the videos, and I can start doing that on some of my others as well to help you navigate through the information. Before we get started, I just want to apologize for a moment. I had intended for this video to be uploaded earlier in the week, but the first recording that I did would not open in my editing software. I could get it to open almost everywhere else, just not in my editing software. And I really needed to be able to cut things out and add some graphics for some of the answers that I have for you. So I do apologize that this is late, and feel free to continue asking questions, or let me know what subjects you have questions about that I can make individual videos for. So before we begin, I'll remind you, my name is Jackie Jones. I am with RE/MAX Elite Realty Group in Jacksonville, North Carolina. I am a North Carolina licensed broker, real estate broker, and a realtor. And we're going to talk a little bit about what the difference between a broker and a realtor is in this video. So let's get started. First section is for sellers. And the first question I get all the time from sellers, that's the very first thing you want to know about, is how much is my home worth? And then a variation of that is, but Zillow said. So let me address the Zillow part first, because that is something that we tend to get a lot, because it sets an expectation that may or may not be real. So the way that Zillow makes their estimates is just an algorithm that they use to pull like houses to compare to yours. But what they don't do is they don't actually use the best comparables. What I mean by that is, if your house is a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, they're going to look for other 3-bed, 2-bath houses in the same zip code. But we know that subdivisions are not created equal, even in the same zip code. We have new builds, and we have houses that were made in the 60s, some even older than that, in Jacksonville, like in the specific zip code. And further out, there's much more variety in the types of houses. So they don't actually choose the very best comparables. And to prove this, all we have to do is look at Zillow themselves. So during the height of our COVID market, Zillow decided to use their Zestimates to try and take advantage of all the people that were selling very, very quickly. And I don't mean take advantage of in a negative way, just do some business. So what they did was they offered people cash for their house, and they used their Zestimate to say, this is what your home is worth. We're willing to take it with no conditions attached for just slightly less than that, because their intention was to turn around and flip it. So they bought a bunch of houses that way. They gave people cash, which means there was no appraisal process. There was no independent person determining whether or not what they were offering the seller was correct. And sellers were able to get ahead and sell their home for far more than what they would have been able to just selling it on the regular real estate market, because it was based on the Zestimate. Well, so then Zillow turned around and attempted to sell them, which meant putting it on the market for buyers that were more than likely getting a loan. And the loan required an appraisal, which is done by somebody that is familiar with the local market and knows how to pick comparables to determine the home's worth. And even in our market at the time where home prices were rising drastically, their Zestimate was still overpriced, meaning they couldn't sell it to anyone that was getting a loan unless that person was willing and able to bring the difference between the appraisal and the purchase price. And in some cases that were so significantly different that buyers were not buying. And I'm going to put up on the screen 2 headlines from articles that came out in 2021, 2022, I think, from the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, that show that Zillow themselves lost millions of dollars by using their Zestimate. Not only that, they were expecting to earn close to $1 billion. So they didn't get to where they wanted, and they ended up going negative, which makes it far worse for them as a business. And they ended up completely shutting down that part of their business and laying off tons of employees. So the numbers that are still on their website may or may not actually be what your home is worth, because we have no way of knowing what comparable properties they have used to come up with that number. So when we look at a property to determine what we think it might sell for, we're trying to use comparables that are like and in the same neighborhood, and houses that have sold within the last 3 months. When I first started about 5 years ago, it was 6 months, but because our market is changing so drastically, it's shorter now. We want to look at things that have sold within the last 3 months, and that's probably max. If we can't find anything, we can move out to 6 months. And if it's a special property, we might have to look in some different ways and be a little bit more creative. But we're not just grabbing houses in the same zip code. We're going to avoid that as best we can. And when an appraisal happens, an appraiser does their appraisal, they're going to be doing the same thing. They may not choose the exact same comparables that we did, but they're going to be using the same kind of criteria to determine which ones are the best comparables. So when we pick our comparables, we're going to try and find houses that are the most alike to your house. But we also have to make adjustments for things that are different. So, for example, if we're looking at a 2-story house, we only want to use houses that are 2-story. But if we can only find houses that have a smaller garage than yours, we can make an adjustment for that. And we can use those adjustments to determine what the difference between that comparable and the property that we're looking at would be if they had the same things. So, for example, if your house has a 2-car garage and the comparable house has a 1-car garage, we want to add whatever the adjustment is to bring that up to a point where it would be priced as if it had a 2-car garage to make them equal. Now, adjustments are going to be different based on the market. And when we look at doing a comparative market analysis, we're going to try and use adjustments that appraisers are using. However, my opinion is not an appraisal. What I say and what I think at that moment may or may not be what the appraiser ends up deciding, but my job is to do as close of a comparative market analysis as to what an appraiser would be looking at and the adjustments that they would be looking at, so that I can give you the advice on where to list your house that's going to be the most likely that an appraiser is going to agree. Now, when we go to market your house, when we go to list your house, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to tell you the exact price that I want you to list at, because that decision is yours. What I'm going to give you is a likely sales range. And I'm going to tell you, this is where I think it's going to list at. Here's the lower end of that, and here's the higher end of that. And then we're going to have a discussion about the condition of your home, and we're going to have a discussion about your goals. So for example, if your timeline is so incredibly tight and you care more about getting your home sold than you do getting top dollar, I'm going to recommend either right on the recommended price or just slightly on the lower end, because your timeline is what you've conveyed as your highest need at that moment. Now, if your timeline is not as tight and you do want that top dollar, we're going to talk about the condition of your home, and if there's any repairs that need to be done before we list it for that price in order for it to sell. Those are the things that we're going to be talking about. So I'm going to give you a range, and then we're going to figure out where you are within that range based on your needs, your goals, and the home itself. So the next question that I got was, are we in a seller's market or a buyer's market? Now, let me preface this with the answer to this that I'm going to give you is specific to Onslow County. The reason I say that is, one, real estate is incredibly local. It is always going to be local. It has always been local. There are national things that will affect that market, but the conditions of a specific market is that specific market. Now, in Onslow County, because we have Camp Lejeune, and that's the largest Marine Corps base on the East Coast, we have military members moving in and out all the time. And that makes our market a little bit different than other places, and we tend to be about 3 to 5 years behind the national average. So if you're watching this and you're not in Onslow County and you don't own property or you don't plan on buying property in this area, and when I say Onslow County, it does mean the surrounding counties, because they are also affected by the same the same variables that we have, but kind of outside that is going to be different. Even the surrounding counties are going to be different, but they do have similar influences on them. So, are we in a seller's market or a buyer's market? I have been telling everyone that I speak with that we're kind of in both, and we're kind of in neither. We're a little bit in the middle. And what I mean by that is seller's markets tend to be markets with low inventory and high demand and favorable buyer conditions. Not necessarily in competition, but it's easier for buyers to get a loan, and it's easier for them to be in a position to buy, because that's the people that are going to be looking at the inventory are obviously buyers. So when it comes to what we're seeing in the market that would be more favorable to a seller's market is that we have kind of low inventory. We don't have a lot of houses that are being sold, but we do have buyers coming in through PCS season that are wanting to buy. So we do have a lot of competition and low inventory. So on the other hand, when we're in a buyer's market, we're looking at things that are more favorable to buyers, which means that there's an overflow of inventory. You have lots of selection, and sellers are willing to offer concessions. Now, although we're not seeing those specific variables when it comes to buyers, what we are seeing is that we have interest rates that have gone up compared to the extremely low interest rates that we were seeing just a couple of years ago. And so, although we do have competition happening, houses that don't sell immediately kind of sit a little bit longer because we have the higher interest rates and buyers are scared to buy right now, which means that what is favorable to buyers is that sellers might be quicker to offer concessions. They might be more willing to offer money towards a buy down, which will help bring that interest rate down for a couple of years. Or they might be willing to pay some or all of the closing costs. And that is making some conditions more favorable to the buyer. Now, because we're in PCS season, we've kind of swung a little bit further back into the seller market. But before PCS season started, Onslow County was kind of closer to a buyer's market because we've just seen interest rates rise so much so quickly since the end of really our crazy COVID market where they were so low. And then for kind of neutral in the middle is that we're still seeing elevated home prices because of that craziness during COVID, but they're not continuing to rise at the level and at the speed that they were during that market. So sellers aren't losing the value that they earned, but buyers aren't having to compete as much with the price of the home. So we're kind of a little bit in both, kind of in neither, kind of in the middle. It really just depends on the particular property and the particular buyer. And how I work is I'm going to figure out your needs, I'm going to figure out your goals, and then I'm going to look at all of the houses that you're interested in, that you tell me you're interested in, and we're going to look at specific variables about that house and about each individual house so we can figure out maybe which one you might have a better hand at. And if you're a seller, I'm going to tell you exactly the range that I think you should sell. We're going to go through that conversation that I mentioned in the last question, and we're going to figure out where we should price it and if we need to offer anything as far as seller concessions to make your house sell in the time that you want it to sell and at the price you want it to sell. So the next question I typically get from sellers is it better to sell or to rent my home? And the answer to that, again, is going to be, it depends. It's based on your goals. So there's a lot of variables that are going to go into determining what option you decide. And that's always going to be completely your decision. Now, if your goal is to be able to come back to the area when you finish either your contract or you're hoping to PCS back to this area, then my opinion would be that it would probably be better to rent out your home while you're gone, because we don't know what the market's going to do until then. And because the military tends to be a little bit unpredictable, you may not PCS back to the area as quickly as you would like to. So in that scenario, I would say, here's the pros and cons. My recommendation would be to rent out the house. If you decide you don't want to do that, perfectly fine. If you are not planning on coming back and you have some equity, what we're going to do is we're going to do an estimated net sheet, and we're going to look at what you still owe on the house, and we're going to go through all of the potential costs that are associated with selling a house. And when I say potential, I'm going to add things like closing cost in there. Even if we don't end up paying them, even if we don't end up offering them, I want to put that on your estimated net sheet, because in the event that we do end up having to pay them in order to get the home sold, I want that to be something that you are expecting and not a surprise. So we're going to count that on our estimated net sheet so that we know where you stand as far as how much money you're potentially going to get back after selling that house. And we're going to determine if that's worth it for you. So my goal with everyone I work with is we're going to sit down, we're going to find out your needs, we're going to find out all of the variables that could affect your decision, and then I'm just going to give you that information and you tell me how you want me to respond. Okay, so now let's talk about the questions that I got from buyers. And the first one is, what's included in my monthly mortgage payment? Now, I did a video on this when I talked about buying versus renting, and I explained it. I also did a short that explained it in, well, very quickly. So if you have more questions about this, I'm going to link the video in the description box, and feel free to check that out so you can get a little bit more detail. But when it comes to your monthly mortgage payment, it's made up of 4 parts, and I always group those into 2 pieces because on your closing disclosure and in your actual mortgage payment, it's going to be broken up separately. I'll explain what I mean. So the first part is made up of your principal and your interest. Your principal is what you owe on the house, like the money that you actually borrowed minus however many payments you made where the money was made was applied to the principal. And the interest is just that. It's the interest that is being charged against your principal every month. Now, that when I say that group, that is a chunk of the payment. And when you close on a house, you'll see where it says your principal and interest payment is this, but then your total monthly mortgage payment is something else. So that principal and interest, the total amount of that will never change. What it's applied to will change. So for example, if your total principal and interest payment is $500, in the beginning, more of that is going to go towards your interest than it will your principal. But as that changes throughout the life of your loan, that total amount is not going to change unless you refinance. So it's always going to be $500 that goes towards the principal and interest. Where it goes is going to shift, but it's always going to be $500. The other side of that, the other group, is going to be your taxes and your insurance. Now, this is another amount together that makes your monthly mortgage payment, but that is split up separately because what they're taking for your taxes and insurance are going to go into an escrow account and be held. And that amount is going to be based on your tax bill and how much your insurance costs. And we know that property taxes go up, and we know that insurance goes up. So that chunk of your monthly mortgage payment is likely to change. Now, you do have the option of shopping for better rates with insurance, and that can help with that number a little bit, but that side of your monthly payment is not stable. It's not going to stay the same for the life of your loan. And together, those 2 groups make up your PITI payment, and that's your total monthly mortgage payment. So the next question I got was, do I need a home inspection? Yes. Absolutely, 100% yes. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Is a home inspection required? No, it's not, but it is in your best interest. The home inspection is going to nitpick every little thing that is wrong with your house or the house that you're buying or could be wrong in the future. That does not mean that the house is not a good house to buy. We get that a lot. Inspection reports look scary because that's the inspector's job. They're going to nitpick everything. But a good inspector is going to put into their report how urgent it is, whether it's a safety issue, and who should fix it. So for example, if it's an electrical problem, they're going to tell you whether it is a fire hazard or if it's just something that should be fixed. And they're going to say, in that instance, that a licensed electrician should be the one to fix it. So they're going to tell us whether or not it's something that needs to be addressed now, if it's a safety hazard, if it's a fire hazard, anything along those lines, or if it's something that you might just want to watch over time to see if it gets worse or changes or things you might need to fix in the future. A good inspector is going to be willing to go over that with you and help you make those decisions on what to ask the seller. But 100%, you should have a home inspection. That's something that we saw back in the crazy market where buyers were putting in the offer, or they were being recommended to put in the offer, that they were waiving the home inspection completely, that they weren't even going to have one done. And that is the worst thing that you could do to to yourself as a buyer, because now you're buying the house blind. Whether you're physically here and can get eyes on the house or you're across the country, you have now essentially blinded yourself. You've put a blindfold on and you are buying that house without any additional professional information, because there are things that you and I don't know to look for. And there are things that we could miss because the house is beautiful and everything is great, and we just don't know what's going on behind the walls, whereas an inspector is going to go in and look for specific things that could be wrong. There was also things that we were seeing where people were saying that the inspection would be for information only. And that's really putting yourself in a bad negotiating position as both a buyer and a seller that accepts that offer, because when it comes to buyers backing out of the transaction, they're allowed to back out for any or no reason. It doesn't have to be because of the inspection, and they don't really have to tell you. Now, as a buyer, you could be putting due diligence and earnest money deposit on the line depending on when you decide to terminate that transaction. So a potential scenario that could happen is, we as the buyer have said, we're going to do an inspection, but we're not going to negotiate any repairs. It's for our information only. But now we get the inspection report and we find something that scares us. And it could be something that the seller is willing to fix, or something that is an easy fix that the seller would agree to. But because we've put in an offer that says the inspection is for information only, we don't feel like we can negotiate it, and the seller could potentially be mad if you try to negotiate it because you told them you weren't going to. And now your options are to either take it with the scenario that is scaring you, which is going to make a lot of buyers upset, or you're going to terminate and lose your due diligence, potentially your earnest money deposit if you've backed out after the due diligence period. And now everybody is back at square one when we could have come to the table and found a solution that was best for everybody. So the next question I got was, what is the difference between a home inspection and an appraisal? Now, here's something that I hear a lot when it comes to the VA loan specifically, and I will hear people say that they don't need a home inspection because the VA loan has their own. And what that person is referring to is the home appraisal. They're not the same thing. We just talked about what inspections were. So what an appraisal is that they're just looking for the market value, and they're going to compare that to the contract to determine whether or not the contract matches market value. And what that appraiser says is what the lender is going to loan you. Now, so if the difference between that and the contract price is about $20,000, we either need to renegotiate or the buyer is going to be expected to bring the difference, which is why it's super important for both the buyer's agent and the listing agent to know what that house is likely worth. Now, VA loan and FHA loan do have guidelines that says there are certain conditions of the home that have to be met, and the VA appraiser may say that there are certain things that need to be fixed. However, most of the time, they are not extensive. They're not extensive. They're not a full list of things that could potentially be wrong with the house. So the appraiser is not going to go in and determine whether or not the outlet beside the kitchen sink is GCFI protected. And they're not going to go up on the roof to see if there's leaks other than things that are completely obvious. They're not going to determine whether or not the dishwasher works. They're just looking to make sure that the condition of the home meets VA guidelines. So, buyer question number 4. Can I back out of buying a home? Yes, you can. There are consequences, but North Carolina allows buyers to back out at any time up until they sign their closing papers for any or no reason at all. Now, I have a video on my channel explaining due diligence fee and earnest money deposit. And if you have more questions about that, go ahead and check that out. I'm going to link it below. But essentially, what these both are negotiated amounts that you are offering the seller up front. The due diligence fee goes to the seller directly, and it is never refundable unless the seller breaches. But just think about that money. If you decide to back out of the transaction, that money is gone. And the earnest money deposit is also a negotiated amount that is going to go to our escrow agent that we choose. And that money is going to sit in an escrow account until the end of the transaction. Now, if you close, both of these amounts go towards what you owe on the house, even the money that went to the seller. They're going to be applied to your closing cost, your down payment, anything that you owe on the house. But if you back out, you could potentially lose that money. Like I said, the due diligence is already gone if you decide to back out. But within the contract, we are going to pick a date that's going to be the end of your due diligence period. This is also a negotiated date. It is something that the sellers can counter if they don't like that date. So this is your time to investigate the property and determine whether or not you want to continue moving forward. That's your time to do your inspections. It's the time for the appraisal to be done and completed. It's any kind of inspection you want, a survey, an HVAC inspection, any kind of inspection that you want should be done during the due diligence period. Buyer question number 5. How long does the seller have to respond to my offer? The answer to that is there's not really any time. Now, North Carolina real estate brokers are required to present all offers to the seller as soon as possible, but no later than 3 days. So at the very least, the seller has 3 days to have the offer presented to them. Now, when it comes to that rule, listing agents should not be waiting the full 3 days if it is possible to present those offers to the seller before that. But they do have at least 3 days to present that offer. Sellers can take as long as they want to respond to it. And sometimes sellers just decide they don't respond at all, which is not advisable as a listing agent, but they can decide that. Now, as a buyer, if you have a time crunch and you're worried that you're going to lose out on other properties if they don't respond to you, then we can put a time limit on how long the seller has to respond before that offer just dies and is no longer in effect. But that's completely up to you. And the job of a buyer's agent is to follow up with the listing agent and make sure that they do get a response. The next question I had was, am I allowed to put more than one offer in at a time? And yes, you can. However, it's not advisable, because the second that an offer is accepted by the seller and that acceptance is communicated to your buyer's agent, you owe any due diligence money that was offered. So if you put in multiple offers and 2 or more get accepted, and that acceptance is communicated to your agent before you're able to rescind all of those offers, you now owe due diligence money on any houses where the offer was accepted without change. So although you can, and that's your choice, and your agent should follow your lawful instruction to do that, it's not advisable unless you're willing to take that risk. So the last question I had from buyers was, why do I need a pre-approval before looking at houses or putting in an offer? Let's start at step 1. Until you go through the process with a lender, we really don't know how much a lender would be able to offer you in a loan amount. So if we start from the beginning, knowing what you can buy, So say we are looking at houses up to $300,000 because that's what the lender said they would loan you and you're comfortable with that potential payment. We can look at houses at 300 being our top max. And then within that group, we can find what meets your other needs. And we can look at those houses and we can find a house that you love in that amount. But if you go into the process thinking you can buy up to $500,000 and we start by looking at houses in the $500 range, I guarantee you the second we get told that we need to start looking at 300 or lower, you are never going to find a house that you love, because $300,000 houses, while in our area are really, really nice, because they will never compare to the $500,000 house. So to save you a little bit of heartache, let's start by knowing where we need to be looking. Because if we start where we need to be at, you will find a house that you love, because you're not comparing it to houses that you were looking at before. And when it comes to putting in an offer, sellers and listing agents are going to want to know that you are pre-approved for that amount. And if I don't have that and we're scrambling to get it, the house that you just fell in love with may not be available anymore, or your offer may not be accepted because we did not have that in advance. Okay, so now we're going to move into the section that kind of applies to everybody. Now, the first question I have is it a good market to buy or sell? Now, I know we kind of touched on the specific market, whether or not it's a buyer's market or a seller's market, and I gave my opinion of this area, but this is a little bit more nuanced than that. And the people that were asking me this was specifically, is it a good time to buy or sell? And my answer is always going to be, if you need to buy or sell, or you want to buy or sell, it is always a good time. And I say that because I don't know what it's going to look like 3 months down the road. And the conditions may be even less favorable for you then. And if you need to sell, or you want to sell or buy, then you should do it now. Now, I know there's a lot of people that are afraid of interest rates, but we need to keep into perspective that where the interest rates are at now was very similar to where they were at when I first got my license 5 years ago. The only reason they seem like bad rates is because we just went through a market where they dropped. And let me just be frank, those were fantastic rates. We are highly likely to never see those again because they were a reaction to an unprecedented event. Now, it's really hard when we look at those rates and compare them to the rates of today. I understand it and I can empathize with it. But if you need to buy a house, there are things that we can do to help mitigate that fear a little bit. There's things like, well, just buying down your rate completely. You can pay for discount points if you have the money to do it. We can do a buy down where certain amount of years your interest rate will be lower. And when you do that, if the rates dropped within that time frame before it went back up to whatever the interest rate was at the time you bought, you can refinance, and any money that you paid into the buy down will then be applied to the principal amount. So you're not losing any money that way. If you're a seller right now and you're worried about the buyer fear of interest rates, if we have the money for it, we can offer those buy downs for the buyer so that we're offering incentives that will attract buyers to our house. We could also work with a lender that offers lender concessions so that that money is not coming out of your pocket. And there's things that we can do to mitigate the fears and the conditions of the current market and make it more favorable to you. So if you want to buy or sell, or you need to buy or sell, it is always a good time because we don't know what the future is going to hold. And I know that's a little cynical, but there are always things that we can do now to make the condition more favorable. So if you want to buy or sell, go ahead and reach out to me and we can go through all of the variables and figure out if you feel that that is the right course for you right now. Okay, so the next question I had that didn't really go with sellers or buyers, maybe both, was what is the difference between a real estate agent, a real estate broker, and a realtor? So when it comes to North Carolina, we are what is called a broker-only state, meaning every single licensed real estate agent is a broker. We have different statuses. What that means is that when you first get your license, you pass your pre-licensing test, your class, you pass the state and national test, and then you receive your license, you are going to be on provisional broker status. And you have to be under the direct supervision of a broker in charge, and everything you do has to go through that broker in charge. You can't do anything on your own. And while you're in that stage, you have 18 months to take 3 post-licensing classes. You can take them as quickly as you want or as slowly as you want, but you only have the 18 months to complete all 3. Once you finish that, you go to a full broker status. After you work full-time for 2 years as a full-time broker, you can apply and take classes to become broker in charge eligible. And that is going to give you the ability to potentially become a broker in charge of a firm. But you don't have to be a broker in charge of a firm to be broker in charge eligible. And that's the 3rd status that we have. There are other states that have real estate agents and then real estate brokers, and the broker is going to be very similar to a broker in charge in North Carolina. And then there's other states that have real estate salespersons and then real estate agents, and those are going to be even more different. So North Carolina, although a lot of people use real estate agent and real estate broker synonymously in North Carolina, they really mean the same thing, and it just depends on what status you are. That's going to determine your license status essentially, but we're all brokers. Now, a realtor is a member of the National Association of Realtors. Not all real estate brokers or real estate agents are a member of the National Association of Realtors. So not all real estate agents or brokers are realtors. I happen to be a North Carolina real estate broker and a realtor, which means I'm a member of the National Association of Realtors and I'm a member of our local realtor board. Now, the difference here is that the realtors have to follow state laws, obviously, but we also have to follow the Realtor Code of Ethics, which is an additional standard that we have to meet. And we also have access to the local multi-listing service, or the MLS, which gives us the ability to use a wider variety and a wider range of data to help you find a house or to get your house sold. The National Association of Realtors also enables us to cooperate with agents of other companies easier. We have access to Sentry lock boxes, or some are Supra lock boxes. And these are the electronic boxes that enable us to access properties that are for sale as long as we have an approved appointment, which also is part of it. We have a showing service that we all share where we can request a showing and the listing agent is going to be able to approve it instead of having to track every single listing agent down and call or text until they get back to us. And then they're going to have to call their seller and request that with their seller. The showing service is going to be able to be set up however we want it to be. If we have a vacant home, then it would be the listing agent that's approving the showings. And if it's not vacant, the owner's still living there, then the owner would be able to approve those showings at times. But this is part of the cooperation that realtors are able to provide to give you better access to homes that are on the market, or better access to the buyers that are on the market, because the agents, although they're with different firms and they give you different agency representation, they're able to cooperate together through the systems that we have and provide you better service. Okay, so that is all the questions that I have for this video. If you have more questions that I didn't answer, feel free to leave a comment or contact me. My information is in the description box. Feel free to reach out. If you're wanting to schedule a meeting with me, either through Zoom or in person, feel free to use the Motion link that I have in the description box. That's going to take you to my calendar and give you all of the times that I am free to meet with you during working hours during the week. Now, if you need something outside of those times, you can always contact me and we will figure out a time that works best for you to have that meeting or that discussion. And as always, remember that when you're working with a North Carolina real estate broker, that they go over the North Carolina Working with Real Estate Agents disclosure form at first substantial contact. If you don't know what I mean by that, I have a video that explains what that disclosure is and why it is so important for you to make sure that your agent is going over that before you give them confidential information. I just want to say again, thank you so much for offering all of these questions and helping me to make this video great. I thank you so much. I appreciate all of your feedback, all of your comments, all of your likes and subscribes. I know we're a new channel and I'm slowly improving and I'm slowly getting there, but I really appreciate all of the support that you've given me. Thanks. Have a great one.